I grew up in a house that, at first glance, seemed perfect. My name is Leah, and for most of my childhood, I thought my family was everything I could ever want. My father was the steady pillar of our home. He was strong, reliable, and always there when we needed him. He worked hard to provide for us and never shied away from any task, whether it was fixing the car or starting yet another one of his never-finished DIY projects around the house. My mother was the heart of our family. She was warm, loving, and kept everything in balance. She prepared our meals, maintained the household, and made sure we felt safe and cared for. The love they shared was palpable, and I felt fortunate to be their daughter. For me, my parents were the perfect couple. I admired my father for his strength and resilience, and I looked up to my mother for her nurturing and gentle nature. Together, they formed what seemed like an unbreakable unit. No matter what challenges life threw their way, they handled it with grace. I never questioned the security of my home, or the love we shared as a family. It all felt simple and perfect. Growing up, my connection with my father was especially strong. I followed him everywhere, helping with small tasks like mowing the lawn, fixing things around the house, or assisting him with DIY projects. He was my hero, and I wanted to be just like him. We had a bond that I never doubted. As I got older, that bond grew even deeper. The conversations we shared shifted from the light-hearted exchanges of childhood to more serious discussions. We talked about everything: life, dreams, my future. He became the person I turned to when I had questions about anything, and his wisdom seemed endless. I didn't think much about the closeness of our relationship. It was just something that felt natural. With my mother, the relationship was different, but no less important. She was the one who always made me feel safe, who listened with an open heart and offered advice when needed. While Dad was the strong, steady influence in my life, Mom was the emotional anchor. She knew how to bring balance and warmth to our home, and she kept things running smoothly. I never questioned her role or her love, but my bond with Dad always felt a little more special, something I cherished deeply. As the years passed, I began to realize that the bond I shared with my father wasn't quite like any other. It wasn't just the bond of a father and daughter, it was something deeper, something I hadn't fully understood yet. And so, as I entered my teenage years, I began to notice small, subtle shifts. Our conversations became more meaningful, our connection more intense. I didn't realize it at the time, but the line between us was slowly beginning to blur. In those quiet moments, I never thought to question my relationship with my father. We talked openly about everything, from my future to his past, and everything in between. I had always found comfort in these conversations. But I began to notice things, small things, tiny details that, at the time, didn't seem significant, but would later become the foundation of a growing unease I couldn't quite put into words. As the days passed, small changes began to build up between my father and me. They were so subtle at first that I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. It started with the way he looked at me. The loving gaze that I had always known now seemed to linger just a second longer. At first, I dismissed it. After all, he was my father, and his gaze was always filled with warmth and care. But as time went on, I began to feel an odd discomfort in those moments, like something wasn't quite right. I started to notice little things. The way he would brush my hair out of my face when I was talking to him, his hugs that seemed to last just a little too long, and his increasing desire to spend time with me. He would invite me to do things with him that we hadn't done before, projects that, in the past, had been reserved for only the two of us. There was an eagerness in him, a subtle urgency, to be close. And while nothing overtly inappropriate ever happened, these changes began to weigh on me. I didn't know how to explain it, but I began to feel uncomfortable around him. It was as though the lines between father and daughter were starting to blur, and I didn't know how to stop it. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that I was overthinking. After all, Dad had always been kind, loving, and protective. But the more I tried to dismiss the changes, the more they grew. It became harder to deny that something was shifting in our relationship. I began to wonder if I was the only one feeling this way. Was it possible that I was imagining it all? Perhaps I was just reading too much into innocent moments that meant nothing. I wasn't the only one who noticed the changes. My mother, though she never said a word, started acting differently. She became more distant. At first, it was small things, a quiet, disapproving glance when Dad and I spent time together. But over the days and weeks, it became more apparent. She started to watch us more closely, as though she was scrutinizing every interaction, every look that passed between us. There was a suspicion in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place, and it made me uneasy. I didn't want to believe that anything was wrong. After all, my relationship with my father had always been strong and loving, but the growing distance between my parents was impossible to ignore. Mom became more withdrawn, and Dad's behavior was growing more intense. The warmth in our home was gradually being replaced by a tense, uneasy atmosphere that I couldn't explain. The air felt thick with unspoken words, and every day that passed only made the silence between us more pronounced. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, convincing myself that this was just a phase, that things would go back to the way they had been. But deep down, I knew that something was changing, and I couldn't stop it. I wasn't sure if it was something I had done, or something that was happening beyond my control, but I could feel the shift. It was like the foundation of our family was slowly cracking, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Then one evening, it happened. My mother stood up abruptly after dinner and announced that she was leaving the house. It wasn't like her to leave without telling us where she was going, but neither Dad nor I questioned her. The moment she left, I noticed a strange change in Dad's behavior. He seemed almost relieved, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The tension in him melted away, and he suggested we watch a movie together. I felt a strange unease settle in my chest. It was as though the atmosphere had shifted again, and I didn't know how to process it. We sat down on the couch to watch the movie, but I couldn't focus on it. The room felt suffocating. Dad was sitting too close, and his gaze was on me again, just like before, too intense, too lingering. My heart raced in my chest, and I could feel the tension between us grow with each passing second. Something had changed, and I didn't know how to bring it back to normal. That evening, as we sat together in the living room, something between us seemed to shift in a way I couldn't understand. I felt the weight of Dad's gaze, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't look at him without feeling a strange discomfort. His eyes were filled with something deeper than just fatherly love. There was an intensity in them that unsettled me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that I was just being overly sensitive. After all, it was just a movie, just a moment between father and daughter. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the movie played in the background, I found myself more focused on Dad's presence than the plot on the screen. The space between us seemed to grow smaller with every passing minute, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. The normal comfort I used to feel in his presence was gone, replaced by a growing tension I couldn't explain. Suddenly, without warning, Dad reached over and placed his hand on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like an electric shock. His hand lingered for a moment longer than necessary, and I could feel the warmth of his touch seep into my skin. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, unsure of how to respond. It was an innocent gesture, one that seemed completely harmless at first glance, but the feeling it left in me was anything but innocent. His face was closer now, his breath warm against my cheek. He turned to me, his voice soft and hesitant, almost as if he were unsure of what to say. "Leah," he whispered, his words hanging in the air, thick with meaning. "You know I'm always here for you, right? You can talk to me about anything." I nodded, but my throat was tight. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension that had built up between us, but the words wouldn't come. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that everything was still the same, that he was still the loving father I had always known. But deep down, I couldn't deny that something had shifted. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't just the protective, caring father I had always known. There was something more to it now, something I didn't fully understand. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trying to steer the conversation back to something normal, something safe. I wanted to believe that nothing had changed, that this was just my imagination running wild. But as the words left my mouth, I realized that the atmosphere in the room was thick with something unspoken. Dad looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine, as if he were trying to make a decision. Then, as if the tension had reached its peak, he withdrew his hand and quickly stood up. "Of course, everything's fine," he said, his voice too quick, too forced. He smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll just check something in the garage." He left the room, and I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. My mind was racing. What had just happened? Was I overreacting? Had I imagined the way he looked at me, the way he touched me? But even as I tried to push those thoughts aside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. That invisible line that had once existed between father and daughter seemed to be fading, and I didn't know how to stop it. That night, lying in my bed, I replayed everything that had happened over and over in my mind. I didn't want to believe that something inappropriate was happening. After all, Dad hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't crossed any lines, at least not overtly, but deep inside, I couldn't ignore the unease that had settled in my chest. I knew something was wrong, even if I didn't fully understand what it was. The next morning, everything felt different. Mom was even more distant than before. She barely spoke to Dad, and when she did, her words were clipped and cold. The once warm and loving home I had grown up in now felt cold and silent. The space between my parents was growing wider, and I felt as though I were caught in the middle of something I couldn't fully grasp. I wanted to go back to the way things were, to the days when everything felt simple and easy. But it was too late. The cracks in our family had already started to form, and there was nothing I could do to stop them from widening. I tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, but it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the growing tension between Dad and me. The warmth that had once existed between us had been replaced by something darker, something that I couldn't explain. I began to question everything: my relationship with my father, my family, even myself. What was happening? How had we gone from a happy, loving family to this strange, uncomfortable silence? Days passed, and the distance between my parents grew even more evident. My mother's silence turned into open avoidance, and Dad's increasing need to be close to me only made things more complicated. I could feel the tension in every room of the house, thick and suffocating. It wasn't the home I had known. It felt like we were three strangers living under the same roof, all of us stuck in our own version of reality. Then, one afternoon, Mom finally confronted me. Dad was at work, and she caught me alone in the kitchen. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with concern, but there was something else, something darker. She hesitated before speaking, and when she did, her voice trembled. "Leah," she said softly, "is something happening between you and your father? Something strange." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt a cold wave wash over me. I had been dreading this moment, the moment when the truth, or what my mother suspected, would come out. I froze, not knowing how to respond. "No, Mom," I managed to say, though my voice shook. "Nothing is happening." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they didn't feel entirely true. Something had shifted between Dad and me, and neither of us could deny it. But how could I explain it? How could I put into words something I didn't fully understand myself? Mom looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine, trying to see if I was telling the truth. Finally, she sighed and nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. The air between us had shifted again, and the cracks in our family were no longer just a feeling, they were real. After that conversation, things between my mother and me were strained. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the unspoken questions lingering in the air between us. It was as though she knew something was wrong but couldn't fully grasp what it was. The distance between us grew. My mother became colder, more withdrawn, and I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells, unsure of what to say or do. Dad, too, seemed to sense the growing tension. His behavior became more intense. He wanted to spend more time with me, and each time he did, I felt a deepening discomfort. His touch lingered a little too long, and his presence was suffocating. The moments I once cherished now felt overwhelming, and the father I had once trusted seemed like a stranger to me. But despite the discomfort, I kept telling myself it was just a phase, a misunderstanding, a blip in our otherwise perfect family. One evening, everything came to a head. I was lying in bed, trying to shut out the noise of the world when I heard my parents arguing in the living room. At first, I tried to ignore it, hoping it would be like the other arguments, they'd had nothing serious. But this time, the voices were louder, more urgent. My heart raced as I slipped out of bed and crept to the hallway. "Don't lie to me, Richard." My mother's voice was sharp, filled with pain and anger. "I see the way you look at her, and I see the way she looks at you." My stomach twisted. I knew what was coming, and I knew it couldn't be stopped. My family, my once perfect family, was falling apart right before my eyes. The argument between my parents continued late into the night. The raw emotion in their voices was impossible to ignore. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to the words that shattered everything. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard my mother's voice break. "You think I don't see what's going on?" she demanded, the fury in her tone mixing with the anguish. "You think I'm blind, Richard? I see how you look at her, and I see how she looks at you." My breath caught in my throat. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I couldn't escape the reality of the situation. I wanted to scream, to tell them that nothing was happening, that it wasn't what they thought, but the words wouldn't come. It felt like everything was falling apart, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Dad's voice was softer, more defensive now. "Linda, stop, you're overreacting. This is our daughter, nothing's happening. I love you both, but this isn't what you think." My heart ached as I heard the desperation in his voice. He didn't seem to understand that the damage had already been done. The bond that once held our family together was fraying, and there was no way to fix it. Mum's voice trembled with fury. "I can't do this anymore. I can't ignore what I've seen. This isn't normal, Richard. And I'm not staying in a house with this kind of tension. I don't know what's going on between you two, but it's not right." I couldn't take it any longer. I stepped into the living room, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the tension. "Mom, Dad, stop, nothing happened, nothing is going on." They both turned to look at me, their faces frozen in shock and guilt. My mother's eyes were filled with pain, her heart broken by something I couldn't fully explain. Dad stood there, silent, his face pale as though he had lost everything, though he didn't fully understand why. Mom turned away, her voice thick with tears. "I love you, Leah. But I can't live in this house anymore. I can't trust him, and I can't trust this family." Her words were final, and they hung in the air like an irreversible sentence. With that, she packed her things and left. No goodbyes, no words of comfort, just silence. The house, once filled with love, was now empty.